I'll be a bit contrarian
Okay,
to what Justin just said. I think there's a tremendous almost industry, which is great in terms of helping build Jewish leaders across all the different organizations, Wexner and everybody else. I think the problem that I see in the United States, at least, is that most of the major institutions are very top-heavy, and money is kind of the key to access. And that's not just federations and not just the OU or religious organizations. It's also Jewish schools, JCCs. That's kind of how you get in. That's how you get on the board. That's how you get access to make a difference. The flip side is the social entrepreneurship. So I guess I'd love to get your opinions on how we encourage the social entrepreneurship, but still open those doors. And some of it's moving people out, but also it's letting other people in, when right now that access isn't quite the way we want it to be.
I'll be glad to jump in. Look, maybe on this panel, I'm not the only. I'm definitely one of the champions of social entrepreneurship and making room for it. But let's be honest with ourselves here. At the end of the day, someone's got to pay for it all, right?
Well, no. Well, pay for what? I mean, that's the question. Is it paying for local federation work in the community? What about leadership? I think we're talking about leadership. So the question is, people who have things they want to do or contribute or ideas, how do they get that access to the institutions that are already there?
I'm just going to piggyback on that question, if that's okay. Someone has asked a question that's not often asked, I think, and if you could integrate it into your responses, that'd be super. Once you're in that world and you want to do different, or you want to do more, or acquire leadership skills in not necessarily a Jewish context, how do you do that within the confines of a given organization? Do you need to go outside of an organization, your own organization, in order to do that? If you can tie that in, that would be great.
Can I take that first part of the question about money? In the UK, we've just done a survey to do with the role of women leaders, but it's relevant to this. And one of the recommendations is about separating, or trying to separate, the role of people that bring money to the table, who we absolutely need, and I'm incredibly grateful from a Limbit perspective for each and every one of our donors. We need that money. We need to do it to develop our leaders and to do the programs that we want to do, but that shouldn't necessarily mean that you have a place at the table in deciding the strategy and the vision for an organization. I think for me, they're two separate things. And in terms of, I've completely forgotten the second half of your question.
How do you expand your leadership skills outside of your organization?
Absolutely. So I guess one of the things within Limmud is we do more and more leadership development for our volunteers, and it's interesting, some of our volunteers say it's way better than what they get in their proper jobs. And we do way more as well in terms of what we were saying before about networking. We're bringing people from across the world together to learn from each other. And then I guess it is about relying on leadership programs within the community that provide an excellent service as well.
If I can jump in. Look, one of the reasons such interesting things are happening now, including Limmud, which, by the way, not only is money taken out of the equation in terms of getting involved, but even we, the educators, aren't paid. One of the reasons, just a little plug there, but as part of the success story, and one of the reasons there are such interesting things happening is because foundations are behind them. And foundations don't have to worry about where the money is coming from. And so they can open up into the leadership, into their rooms, all kinds of people who don't bring money to the table, but bring ideas and creativity. You know, it's like cramming for an exam the night before, your brain shuts down. And our federations, in some respect, feel that they're cramming every day, and they can't, it's hard for them to take a breath and think, what about if we open our doors to leaders that don't bring money around the table, which was sort of my point with the quip about the Chanel bag. Now, you know, leave it to Justin, the young one, to make the point on the panel that, of course, this affluence is needed. Of course, donors are needed. None of us are naive. But at the same time, the human resources that are being lost, the human capital and the social entrepreneurship because of this this strata is problematic. And as I said, we're seeing this tremendous birth of ideas because money is not needed to come to the table.
Thank you. Next question, please.
My name is Michael. I'm 15 years old from Israel. And I would like to know why in the boards of the Young Leaders Jewish organizations there is no any young leaders Jews. I mean, there are only older than the ages of the activities of the organization. For example, if we're talking about Taglit, why there is now any 20, 21, 18, even young, young men and women in the boards of the organization.
Right. So I think we talked about this. I think that in some cases, I think that in a lot of cases there are, but I just want to take advantage of the fact that you're a young guy from Israel, yes? So I just want to take advantage and maybe make a mention about that. That I think that this has been a fantastic panel, and it's been great to hear voices from literally all around the world. But there's one word that we haven't really mentioned at all, which is Israel here. Maybe not at all. I stand corrected. So the word that was mentioned few times was Israel.
The word that everyone, no one except Johanna mentioned.
Yeah. So I think that I would just be remiss if this panel, if this session ended without saying that, I mean, I think first of all that that's one thing that's missing from this panel up here. But I do think that that there are amazing things happening in Israel where traditionally I think young Israeli leaders who are striving to think about Israel more in a national context and more in the sense of bettering Israeli society are getting more and more that, that Israel has a central role to play in the Jewish world, and that leadership here in Israel is not just about Israel, but it's about the Jewish world. So I'm encouraged by some of the things that I'm seeing, but I think that a lot more could be done in that realm.
Thanks. Anybody else on the Israel piece from here on the panel?
I want to add something. I think, Justin, first of all, I agree with you, but the centrality of Israel, as I said before, quite at length, is key to all the Jews around the world. But the problem here is that, we have a title which is Jewish leadership. Israeli leadership is Jewish leadership. So, I mean, the Israelis need to realize that not only they're Israelis, but they're also Jews. So the fact that we don't have a Jewish Israeli leader here is, I think, is a mistake, because, the fact that it's Jewish, it doesn't mean it cannot also be Israeli.
I'm sorry, an important addition that, we all need to think about carefully, that not all Israeli leadership is Jewish leadership. There are minority communities and non-minority communities who have a lot to say about the way this country is going to be brought ahead, and that's a whole different discussion, or maybe it's not a whole different discussion, but it's something we need to think about.
That's not the title of the panel. The title of the panel is Jewish leadership, and inside Jewish leadership, you also have Israeli leadership. That's my point.
It's next year's panel. Okay. We have about 5 more minutes for questions from the audience, so please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Gary from Johannesburg. As an entrepreneur, I'm a risk taker, okay? As a lay leader, I agree, I think we have to think out the box, but how do you, as the questions for Justin, how do you, like what type of risk, can you define are you talking about moderate risk taking, aggressive risk taking? Can you give us an example? And how do you balance, because it's a double-edged sword, if the fallout is negative from the risk you're taking, it can be quite costly, so how would you answer that?
So I'll go back to what I introduced there was when I introduced it, I talked a little bit about something I learned from the world of finance. There's investors often have a risk portfolio, or they refer to something as a risk portfolio, which is generally not, you don't put all your eggs in your risk basket. And there definitely is the same kind of approach that's needed here. But I think more important than that is that when I'm referring to taking risk, I'm not talking about just philanthropists spending their money on risky endeavors. I'm saying that there's risk that has to be taken by all of us. I mean, us young people also have to take risks to break out of our comfort zones. Professionals in the Jewish world need to take risks on listening to people. And yeah, also philanthropists need to take some risks on young people with ideas that are cutting edge or that might take us out of our traditional boxes that we're in. So I think that there's elements of risk that we all need to bear, and depending on what positions we play in this global community, I think that's what determines how much risk we need to be ready to have an appetite for.
Can you give one example? I mean.
He's asked for an example. a risk.
Can you give an example? I mean, just a simple example.
A simple example of risk taking.
I mean, what you're referring to, like from a community perspective.
Joanna just said it now. I mean, consider Birthright Israel. The idea of bringing young people on a free trip to Israel. Consider this conference, for example. The idea of bringing all these people from around the world to gather. I think there's a lot of good examples.
Birthright was started by entrepreneurs, not by agency initiative.
I'm sorry, we're going to need to.
Come again?
We're going to need to stick with the microphone, folks. You're welcome to stand up and get in line.
Birthright was started by entrepreneurs.
That's not a microphone. Do we have time for 2 more questions? Folks have just been waiting patiently.
Okay, so very quickly, I was very interested by what Deborah said about sometimes you're in a room and anyone under the age of 40 with a pulse is just called a leader by virtue of turning up. Or I'm paraphrasing somewhat. But have we cheapened the term and the role of leadership? Are we sometimes trying too hard by kind of chasing everyone under the age of 40 and trying to put them on boards and call them leaders? I certainly know people who don't go to things because they say, oh, they'll just try and get me to do something. Are those people the failures, or are we sometimes trying too hard?
I mean, look, I think the only negative outcome of cheapening the word is the extent to which we might not be attracting those others that Daniel spoke of, and sort of what was behind one of the questions of this panel, which is who else is out there that's really interested and talented, but is not coming onto this enterprise. I almost did an initiative in San Diego where the granting fell through, but I was approached to do a project that would somehow look at who's in the environment in leadership and what is the process by which we get them interested enough in us that we harness their talents. So for me, it's okay that we call everyone a Jewish leader. It's very Jewish of us to call everyone a Jewish leader, but the point is, what are we losing by that? There is an idea of something having a cachet to it and putting language to something that's meaningful and authentic. So yes, I think you're correct, and I think I'm correct in making you think that you're correct. That we ought to think a little more carefully about who we call leader and why, and it is because we're so desperate. We don't want to lose someone, and so we compliment the hell out of them so that they'll come back, instead of, as I suggested before, having the confidence that the product, which is Judaism and the enterprise of the Jewish people, is interesting enough and deep enough and complicated enough that people will come on board, even if we don't call them a leader, but engage them in the kinds of ways that Daniel was describing.
Thank you very much. We're going to need to wrap this session, unfortunately. I know there's a lot more questions. I'm going to invite first of all, extend my thanks to this amazing panel and wonderful panel.